Good evening, one and all. Welcome to the probably the last lecture on the ongoing program of the workshop on research methods in international relations, organized by the Jadavpur Association of International Relations. Today's topic is research ethics, and it is to be delivered by Professor Ishani Noshkar. Dr. Ishani Noshkar is at present serving the Department of International Relations, Jadavpur University, Kolkata, as a professor. He has served as a professor at the Department of Political Science, Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata. She has also been visiting faculty at Gaurbanga University, Malda, Kazi Nazrul University, Asansol, and Institute of Foreign Policy Studies, University of Kolkata. She has worked on Indian foreign policy issues, particularly focusing on Act East, sub-regionalism in the Indo-Pacific, maritime issues in areas of Indian Ocean, the Indo-Pacific, and South China Sea. Her interest lies in the Northeast Indian region. She has produced articles and policy papers on behalf of think tanks working with the Government of India, focusing on the following issues. Professor Noshkar has been also actively involved in Track 2 activities like the K2K Forum and the BIMSTEC think tank networks. He has worked on with ICSSR sponsorship on Project Mosam, which will be submitted shortly. Professor Noshkar has served as the acting director of the Directorate of Distant Education of Rabindra Bharati University, and at present she is also the editor of Jadavpur Journal of International Relations. So, without any further delay, I would like to hand over the session to Professor Noshkar, Ishani Noshkar, ma'am, and I would like her to take charge of the session. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you, Shagnik. Very generous words creates a little bit of pressure for me. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, as I see the Jadavpur Association for International Relations, for organizing this kind of a workshop where I can see my students participating very, very enthusiastically, very, very good, because I presume and I assume that many of you will move forward in academics and take up research. Some of you may become serious researchers, some of you may take on to academics in the larger sense. So uh, this kind of a workshop is a true value addition and adds a lot of perspective. I've been told by the organizers that yes, this is the last of the lectures that you're going to hear from various speakers, and you have been quite enriched by many a colleague of mine in my department and in other departments of other universities who have spoken at length and breadth of various aspects of research. And now I have been given the mandate of talking about research ethics. Now, very frankly, let me come to the fact that when one talks about ethics, I feel a little jittery. I am at a trepidation because I'm not very sure that I'm the right person to speak on this. And the reason why I say this is because, ethics is a very, according to me, a very philosophical kind of a discourse. And very frankly, when we were doing it at our times, when we were talking about research methodology, uh, I would rather say that I fear that we hadn't had this kind of component taken up very seriously. So I guess down the line, the idea of also looking at the ethical component of any research project, whether it is a PhD or a small project or even a postdoctorate, has become increasingly significant because as the whole structure and the whole discourse and research has moved along and it has added more and more baggage. There have been complications. So very rightly, I guess, research ethics have become a part of any research methodology uh, discourse, any methodology narratives. Now, having said this, what I'm going to do today with you is first maybe take off from a little bit of a philosophical understanding, of a philosophical approach. And this I always share with all my students with whom I have had the opportunity to interact the first thing I always say is, and that is what has been told and questioned, when I got into research and I had to face interview boards back long ago, my very own professors, they became the devil's advocate and asked me that, Ishani, what makes you think you are cut out to be a researcher? And very frankly, at this point in time, which is at least definitely 2.5 decades ago, if not more, I was absolutely aghast because I really did not know what made me a good researcher. I was not in a position, very frankly, to give a very genuine, honest answer. So I probably would ask all of you to start from, questioning yourself, that what makes you think that you can be a good researcher. What are you actually very seriously interested in pursuing academics, and you want to have an imprint in the domain of knowledge? And why do I say this is most of you are going to pursue PhD or MPhil or something or the other of that sort, and when your PhD and your MPhil will start, you know and it'll be a project for 2 to 3 years. Of course, now MPhil is of irrelevance, but definitely PhD. So a PhD is a project for about 4 to 5 years, and you should be very sure that you are in a position mentally, psychologically, and in your elements, to make sure that you want to do that work for 5 years. And why I say this and I start this way is because professionally PhD in academics is become quite mandatory, and I see that there is a justification for it. That a person who will pursue higher studies must have some contribution, must have some original imprint. As I say, your footprints must be known and shown. But having said this, the PhDs that come out, and the PhDs, the doctoral theses that we all supervise, my esteemed colleagues supervise, and I'm afraid I think I speak for them also. It you have to think about what kind of knowledge you're going to produce, what kind of work you're going to do. Uh, there are various ways of doing research, and I'm going to now enter into that terrain. But I really think that all of you, as students of social science, uh, must make an introspection about what kind of knowledge are you going to produce through your work for the next 5 years, and whether that knowledge will have a value addition to the existing bank of knowledge, perspectives in the larger domain of social science as a discourse. Now, as I've been asked to talk about research ethics, I have managed to create a PowerPoint which I shall share with you, and in my way talk about how I think research ethics is this visible by everybody? Can you just give me a go?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. I'll try and put it on a PowerPoint. Just allow me to. Is it still visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes or no? It's yes, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is how I've kind of, and I have a 1 hour kind of a mandate. So I will probably give you an overviewish kind of thing in ethics. And as I say, I'm not perhaps a philosopher to bring up about the hardcore elements of ethics into it. I will be more speaking in terms of functional knowledge that I've gained over a period of time, and what I see is necessary for anybody who would undertake a research, in the field of social science in the largest sense. So the term research, I am sure you've already known by now, comes from the word researche. And it what are you going to look at? See, if you deconstruct the word and you break the word research, which actually means you're searching again, researching, which actually talks in the largest sense of search for knowledge. And that's the reason why I asked you, are you people going to produce that knowledge which is vital to the repository of existing knowledge in social science? And how would you go about doing it? You would be pursuing, searching for certain facts and figures. You would try and inquire about certain phenomena, certain developments, and try to probe it, try to, go into it and see the whys and the hows that happens. And a very important component of research, and this is what I've been trying to say, that whether you are going to make, you are going to come up with very fundamental things like newer concepts, newer theories, newer approaches, newer perspectives. So when the word research, for me, actually is about these things. And that is how I have put it graphically as to how you should, when you're taking up a research enterprise and you're researching, what are the domains that you're actually going to? What are the vistas that you should keep in your mind to make a mental map before you jump to choose a knowledge? So, what are the objectives of any research? And accordingly, I have shown what kind of researches can be taking place. Most of the people in social sciences, most of the people take up the descriptive one. What does a descriptive research really mean? You try and portray, you describe, you tell about a phenomenon, a group, a development. Take a situation, for instance, you take up the Ukraine war and tries and knows the hows and whys. Many of you were yesterday at Professor Patnaik's, talk, and you must have got some insight as to what is actually happening in Ukraine, what is happening inside, what are the inside dynamics, and you try and portray the realities, you try and bring it out. You see the group behaviors of the Ukrainians there, people living, in Luhansk, people not living to the west of Kiev. These are the things you do, and largely your work becomes descriptive. But I also think in social science, you also can, and many cases, works are also analytical. You analyze certain things. I have people working on. There's just a student of mine in my earlier workplace. I can just share that anecdote. Just submitted a work on something very interesting, and I found it, quite commendable. That she has tried to conceptualize. She has tried to, causally relate how the role of smaller parties, as in regional parties, and how they have impacted foreign policy making. And she's taken up case studies, and taking case studies, what she has done, she has tried to put it in a theoretical framework. Now, this is what I would say: if you are in a position to describe and analyze, then you are able to even conceptualize what you're trying to talk. So it is very important to not only remain uh, confined or restricted to just describing. I mean, there is nothing wrong in describing. You have empirical research which gives a repository of information, compendium of information in a fantastic manner is also a very commendable job. But if you want to make your research survive through time, people would refer back to the works, talk about those works in the later times. Then there must be an analytical, a conceptual, which will actually give the value addition that I'm continuously harping upon, right? So social science is all about description and analysis. Well, some you know work is also about exploration. We call about exploration, right? And when we talk about exploration, we generally means, geological and zoological and discoveries and inventions. But in certain cases, you can also try and explore, as I said, whether you can causally relate certain events. For instance, if you can explore, I'm just trying to, give you a fodder for thought. If you can explore and find out what are the timings when, China and India confrontations have taken place, is there any kind of pattern to it? Is there any kind of, uh, a causal relation of something has happened somewhere between India and another country, which has irritated China, and China is reacting? Is there anywhere where China has done something and India is very irritated and has started taking steps that is irritating? So these causal relations. So you keep on gaining familiarity with a phenomenon. Say, for instance, the India-China kind of confrontation, or the diabolical relationship, India-Pakistan or Afghanistan-Pakistan, and you try and achieve insights into it. And in order to do that kind of, uh, exploration, you always try and bind it up, I would write, tether it, that's a better word I would say, tether it through hypothesis testing. In fact, those who would be taking up academic research in the future in whatsoever way, my suggestion has been to all my students to whom I have had the full opportunity to talk to in other universities also, is try and have a hypothesis. And why do you have hypothesis? Why does your objective need to be tethered in a hypothesis? Is that it gives a sense of purpose to your work. What you're about to do is driven by that hypothesis or a set of hypotheses that you do. It is a binding component so that you do not end up making certain disparate, not desperate, disparate, separate, disconnected observations. You didn't just, bring in brinjals and oranges together to make you understand. You connect the variables and you do have a kind of you try and bring about a cause. As I said, if you can causally prove what are the factors, when are the timings, what are the situations when there are confrontations, what are the timings, what are the situations when the confrontations recede, are there any causal phenomena that we can see, are there distinct patterns we see, distinct, I would say, drivers which see, okay? And also, as I said, if you can determine the frequency at which something happening, you see regular frequencies of something happening, ups and downs. As now, in this world of science, it's fantastic to see how people are looking at the frequency of the COVID. And so therefore, they're trying to understand and diagnose whys and hows of COVID. So you can be a diagnostic kind of a work can also be made. You diagnose or give a prognosis as to why, I would say, the issue of violence in Myanmar against Rohingyas keeps on multiplying. What are the multipliers? You try and figure out the frequency of the violence that has taken place, go back to history, connect the dots, come back and make a diagnosis. Once you know what the diagnosis is, then you know how to handle the crisis should it aggravate. And if you are sure that it will be aggravating, then you can take precautionary policies. The neighborhood can get alerted. They can find a mechanism to intervene, interlude, mitigate the situation. So, what your objectives can be, at the least descriptive. You can make it exploratory, analytical along with it. You can have hypothesis. You need to have a hypothesis, what I feel. And if you are in a position to causally relate the variables that you're dealing with, A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, whatsoever, and how many ever, then you are also in a position to diagnose what you see as your subject, what you see. Because if you can remember, I do not know whether how much of methodology you have already been introduced to. In a synopsis, you have to also write about the statement of the problem. So if you have a problem, you know how to diagnose. I'm going to the next slide. So what I've been trying to say are the various standards. I'm very sure you've done all this, So I'm going to just go through them very quickly. You can have descriptive, analytical, as I said. In science, in pure sciences, you have applied and fundamental research. But in social sciences, I also think you can have fundamental research. But a fundamental research, ladies and gentlemen, needs a lot of patience, needs a gestation period, needs a lot of observation and analysis before you can actually make a fundamental contribution in terms of theorizing, conceptualizing, making certain diagnostic, observations with a sense of, authority. So you have to wait. You have to keep on observing. So research at a point in time, but what happens in a PhD, you really do not have much of luxury until you are absolutely fantastic in your power observation and with your art of writing. In PhD, I always tell all my students who are working with me or whom I've happened to advise that please don't think it is a magnum opus. Do not think you're producing Iliad and Odyssey. Just confine yourself to certain very achievable objectives and keep your project, keep your research work as basic as one can be. So I would add a caveat that in your research, as in the PhD research, which is now becoming a more of a necessary kind of an adjunct to your achievements, that much of fundamental research may not be available. For fundamental research, you have to be more and more. You have to work with the phenomenon for a longer period of time. And as I said, the gestation may be very long. Applied research is actually towards more solution finding. What you find in the fundamental research, you try and apply and you try and bring about solutions, try and answer questions, try and mitigate situations. And the COVID related social problems are the most interesting case studies that one can look at. People have worked about migration, people have worked about women, people have worked about children, people have worked about health workers, people have talked about different kind of occupational hazards. People have confronted about doctors and nurses and social workers, even how prostitutes have been impacted. So these are the areas of applied research in social science, and they can be very, very interesting contributions in terms of addition of knowledge. They may have very small span. They have the brand and I would say the width and brand will be not very long, not huge, because COVID itself is a 2-year kind of a thing that has been and is still unfolding. You have been hearing that there has been a little bit of a spike with a new kind of a variant coming. So it's an ongoing process. So these short-term inputs in the applied field actually will create a whole repository of knowledge, which in the long run will produce a fundamental perspective in relation to, say, pandemic-related security or pandemic-related human security. So that is how the fundamental aspect and the applied aspect can be tethered together. You all know what is quantitative and qualitative. I really don't need to go much into it. I'm sure I think what I have been shared, there have been talks on quantitative and qualitative. So I'm not going to go, but I would say that, in social science, the qualitative impact, element has to be taken with a great deal of care. It is the qualitative part that really matters most. I am not saying that quantitative does not matter. It certainly matters and it should matter. But the qualitative aspect is very interesting, and I can just share you a very interesting one. This is long ago, many years ago. There was a project that was in the offing, and this is at least about 15, 20 years ago, when people were actually talking about documenting the partition. And people were also talking in terms of the people that I was interacting with in the project, uh, in conceptualizing the project, the historians and political scientists, people involved, and sociologists, that we will have a museum, like a Holocaust kind of museum. You know what the Holocaust Museum is back in Germany and Poland. So there was a huge debate, and this is what is qualitative part of it, that what shall be a part of that museum, because it will be a very narrative kind of a thing. So which part of the narration shall be put up for display, which shall be put for consumption, and which part of the narration, which part of the artifacts related to, can you just give me a second? Just give me a second. Hello? 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 So sorry. So which part of the artifacts, or the collections would actually qualify for the qualitative display of the pain and the pangs of the partition is something that one had to really, really, really work through, and everybody realized it's a very, very difficult project, especially when you're talking with oral narratives, you're talking with people's emotions, you're talking with people's mm, approach to the problem, how they viewed that issue. It was a fantastic word, but a very challenging word. So the qualitative part, I find it very interesting, but yes, quantitative is also very important. And I'm not going to spend time because I know there has been a talk on quantitative. Conceptual and empirical is something, again, as I said, empirical is all about intuitive numbers and adding up information, making a beautiful repository of work. They have now are digital archives of wonderful things happening around the world. Digital archives of connecting all the documents of various museums. There is a project that has been happening. I don't know how far it has gone, but it was something that one was in the offing in between India and the neighboring countries, including Southeast Asia. They're just bringing about the repository of historical information, facts and figures and documents. And it would be a fantastic empirical project that would be allow students like you, students of history, students of archaeology, students of any social science, to get access to it. Would it be analytical? Perhaps no. It would just be a compendium, very structured, framed, organized, easy to access kind of thing. And in empirical work, you really have to become more and more clarified in what you're going to put in, what the information you're putting together. So it is an extremely grueling hard work, but it is a very, very important component of research. Conceptual is where you would conceptualize out of the empirical work. You would draw out inferences. You would bring about observations, maybe some conclusions, maybe, certain prognosis as to, yes, this is what it is. This is why it has happened. So conceptual and empirical are also some of the verses. And I put them, in relationship because I think they can be put juxtaposed next to each other. So these are the various types of researches. And I'm sure when you're going to work in the future and go into the academic field, you will be moving around these flyers. You will be working along these contours itself. So now it is for you to decide which of the ones you will combine, which of the ones you think will be compatible. I can only say from my observations and my experiences that it is not possible entirely to have only one kind of research. For instance, if you're having a descriptive research, you would have some analytical part. And in order to analyze, you have to also bring in descriptive elements. So they are some way exotically also related to each other, and that is the reason why I put the arrows to against each other. Now I come to the talk that I wanted to say. I wanted to bring up the context as to why the research ethics has become increasingly important, why we are talking along the lines of a need to have an ethical regime surrounding research. Now, the ethical regime surrounding research in sciences is extremely, extremely important because you are dealing with human subjects. You are dealing with, a lot of experimentation, very advanced technologies in certain cases, very critical elements in certain cases, compounds, chemicals, patients. So there, the research ethics has been always and continuously rigorous. There have been standards that have been set every time you crossed what I would say one level up you would go in scientific research, especially in the world of medicine, in this world of nanotechnology, in the world of armaments. Every time one level up, the ethics have to be determined. But in social sciences, say suppose I'm talking about, just for the sake of argument, I am writing something about Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare, okay? Or I'm talking about, trying to relate Everybody Loves Drought by P. Sainath. What on earth would be the research ethics that I would apply? So why even do I need a research social, how do I place the issue of research ethics in social science? So let us see, why do we need research ethics? First of all, I asked you that question. What will you do by doing research? Are you the right person to do the research? Are you sure you know how to carry your work? Because ethical norms that we are going to create, ethical norms that you're going to use, you know, they are going to help you to do research. They will help you to produce genuine knowledge, seek this truth, bring out the truth in the front, and help you to not do wrong things, not err as far as possible. Okay? To make sure that you're not on the wrong side of research and you're not doing the wrong things. You're not fantastically manufacturing, concocting knowledge which is not true, which mislead people, which gives a wrong impression, which actually will negatively impact academia and the larger life. So ethical knowledge, it's like a constitution. Let's talk it in a more mundane sense. It's like the constitution. Why do you need a constitution of a country? So that how the people will live, how will the government govern, and those who are being governed, the relationship will be systematically, ethically controlled. So when there is ethics, when I'm talking about ethics, I'm saying I'm not a philosopher. There is always a moral bound to it. There is always the larger context of morality that is introduced, that is injected in your research, enterprise, whatever research you do. You have to be ethically correct, especially because you're going to deal with human beings. And nowadays we are talking about multidiscipline, interdiscipline. We're talking about drawing from other knowledge, other social science discourses. You're going to interact, okay? And in interacting and drawing from each other, you also have to, make sure what are the laws of drawing knowledge from other people. How you're going to, say there is a student who has worked on, say, an issue of migration from the tea estates, or the migration uh, from Sundarbans. And he is going to work as a political scientist, but he's also going to draw on sociology. He's also going to draw from perhaps ethnography. These are the things I've seen Amitesh Babu speaking about ethnography. So when he's going to draw and he's going to take in a lot of people, he's going to deal with a lot of real people, real academics, other theories and concepts. How are you going to take? Whether you're going to acknowledge or not, whether you're going to recognize them or not, whether you take the permission or not. These are the things that are essential to your research. And in social science, my dear people, you please do remember that you are also, we have all learned this, in the long run, that the research in social science is very troublesome in a way. Why is it troublesome? Because you are part of your subjects. What happens in pure science? The researcher is physically detached from its subjects, from its, what it is dealing with. Whether it is trying to understand the velocity, whether it's trying to understand light and its various aspects, trying to understand about, in astronomy, maybe the black hole and the fantastic things that, I learned about. I went with my son last Sunday to the planetarium, and I learned fantastic things. But what am I doing? I'm completely detached, and I'm gazing at those wonderful things that are being told to me. I'm not involved in the research. It is away from me. But if you're talking about deprivation of a certain people, if you're talking about deforestation and how it impacts local communities, and you're a member of that place, my dear, you're a part of that. And the knowledge that you produce, the research that you produce, you have certain amount of accountability to the society. So in science, you make very, very important contributions to humanity. But in social science also, you also have some amount of accountability to the public. Okay? You are bound, what you say, what comes out of the pen, what comes out of a research. As I said, you want to have an indelible imprint. You must be sure that you're on the right side of things. You're talking the right things. Maybe, I'm not saying that the truth has to be eternal, then you don't research. But in the perspective that you're working, there must be the truth which will reach out to the society, and it should not lead to negativity. And that is the reason why norms of ethics, research ethics. Will anybody ever ask me whether ethics are uniform everywhere? Certain fundamental laws are. But if you look at the various university sites, girls and boys, you do, and I'm sure you will do. When you will apply abroad, there are major universities, they seriously have a sub-site in their web page, which talks about research ethics very seriously. And they are all norms. And as I said, there is not uniform pattern. But there are certain fundamental things. And the fundamental things relate to what? Your responsibility, accountability. As in social science, it relates your accountability and your responsibility as a social researcher. You cannot flout fundamental laws. You cannot, disrespect human rights. Health and safety standards are very important. You cannot, bring about certain issues which are very sensitive and hurt the people. You are dealing with human beings. So these ethical norms are there. They have been always there. We were not really talking about them as loudly we are doing right now. And this is the reason why it is necessary for all of us to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more we discuss it, the more of experience led, norms come up in the social research discourse, the more and more we will make sure that our research agenda and the methods that we follow do not harm anybody, do not flout the fundamental laws of research ethics. And I'm going to go to the next slide. So here I'm going to talk, or I am talking about where to apply research ethics. Definitely where human beings are involved. Animal experimentation is involved. In the United States, I completely forget the year where they were, and human experimentation and animal experimentation is a part of the medical science more. And in US, I completely forget what is the famous, experiment that took place, I think in the 70s, where, a group of, I'm sorry to use the word, but lack of a better word, black men were taken up and they had syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease. And they underwent experimentation without their consent. Okay. Similarly, in a jail, violence was promoted consciously without the consent of the inmates, or the inmates even not knowing about it, in order to see how far people can take violence and how much of, obedience people are ready to take. So these kind of experimentations were done. We have heard about horrible experimentations done during the Nazi regime. Whether they were true or not is all debatable. But these are the things, where human experimentation and animal experiment, now you cannot even use animals in the cosmetic industry. This has become a very important issue. So this is where you would actually need to be a very rigorous, very careful, very, very regimented about the rules and regulations that are in place to make sure that you do not mis-experiment, you do not misinform, you do not do something without the consent of human beings. In the case of animals, you do not end up actually tormenting and torturing them. Similarly, when it comes to book writing, doing the paper and pen work, you have to be, please, very, very careful about academic misconducts. As I said, scientific misconducts. See, there is a narrative that the COVID crawled out of the lab in China. It's a narrative. I mean, people are still scratching their heads about the truth and not the truth about it, the true and the non-true. But the fact that such a lethal, such a contagious, such a, I would say, mega virus was being, experimented in the lab, if that is true, it itself is very, worrisome. People also talk about biological weapons. We have heard about this. So if this is, one is the, narrative about how COVID became, the spread all over the world, and took roughly about 1/3 of the population in many countries, then it is something very dangerous. So Scientific misconducts and academic propriety is very important. You do not fabricate data, you do not plagiarize, and I'm sure you know what they are. Okay? You have to be very, very careful. And whenever you are writing something, you're drawing facts and figures, you are even drawing ideas from somebody, please do acknowledge. Please do write down the source. It doesn't harm you to give credence to the people who have actually taken all the pain to produce those ideas, facts, and figures. So that is where research ethics are now very, very rigorous. Okay? Well, investigative research is also done. Journalistic research is also done. And there, ethics matter. Bringing out the truth matters. Letting the people know facts matter. So that's what I say, There are so many stories around the COVID that nobody really knows what the truth is. The WHO sent a team to China to actually find out the truth. They went round and round the mulberry bush, but could not get the right answer. The whistleblowing could not be done. The truth could not be actually clarified. Okay? So therefore, you have to be very, very, I would say, pointed in the way you apply research ethics in the scientific world, in case of science, and in social science. I'll give you another example. There is a student of mine who's presently, and he is nowhere in this university, so he's doing some work with me. And he's working on the concept of alienation of his own community in Kashmir. And I'm continuously trying to tell him that please do not get carried away by your emotional attachment and overdo, overwrite, overreact, and misrepresent reality. Misrepresentation of facts and figures and reality is also something that is a part of social science. And so research in social science, norms, the standards, the flyers and markers are different from what it is in science. There are certain fundamental things that come together. You do not steal data from other people. You do not steal ideas from other people. You do not produce false facts and figures. They are the same. But in their own, there are, they are boxed in different areas. But at the end of the day, both in science, both in social science and scientific research, ethics is extremely intrinsically related to your research activity. So I'll go to the next slide. I'm probably coming to the end. I'm not sure what the time that I have. Yeah, I have about 5-10 minutes. So I will just, come to the fact. How are you going to ensure research ethics? I told you why you need it. Why I have been asked to speak about for 1 hour on this topic. Why is it so important? But how am I going to ensure ethics? In social science, we have taken an approach, and in international relations particularly, I'm sure there are many students of international relations in the audience who know that, a particular approach to international relations called realism, and again a subsect of that says that morality is so relative. If morality is relative, then ethical norms should also be relative. And if everything is morality is, there are no fixed strictures about morality in real life, how on earth are you going to ensure it in academics or either? So how do you go about ensuring research ethics? To bring about the morale, the morality, you inject and infuse it while you're working. So here are the things that I have brought in together to show or to just share with you people how I think research ethics can be ensured. And this is not the full and final list, please. There can be very many more. And as I said, as you keep on doing research, as your experience changes, as you move along research, many new things in many situations will teach one researcher or a group of researchers or a generation of researchers to have newer elements under the larger rubric of research ethics. The first thing I always say, and that is the reason why I shared that personal anecdote, is honesty. If you do not have honesty and you're not going to be true to your work and to the others, then what is the big deal in having a research project? Plagiarism is just one part of it, And people are talking at length about plagiarism because that is now identifiable through technology, through programs and through software, etc., etc. But there is a larger sense of honesty that I'm actually trying to indicate here because we are being ethical and moral. Okay? So it starts with the fact that you are ready for research and you are an honest researcher. You are true to your product. It is your product of love for the labor that you're going to put in. So it starts from there that you like the work you're going to do. Just don't pick up any, I would say, wayside topic and just come and say that, oh, I want to work on this. But somehow I have to get a degree, so let's get it done with. It doesn't happen that way. It shouldn't happen that way. So honesty is an extremely important component of what you're going to do. Right? I can, again share unfortunate anecdotes where I've actually seen someone who made a presentation and then I realized the presentation actually matches someone. Then I could actually tell, and I'm not going to go into the details because it's unfortunate and I don't want to be very, very candid about it. And I realized that the person has just taken off parts and bits from books, and I could actually even tell which books and which pages. And I thought, this sort of person who is going to do a work and he claims to do things that he is actually academically wedded to that issue has such an immoral start. So it is about honesty. Objectivity, as I said, you please make objective observations. You are social scientists have to be neutral to their subjects. Okay? Suppose you're talking about India and Pakistan. Just for the sake of argument, I'm saying. So what do you get? The Indian gets carried away about, the Pakistanis are the monster, the eternal monster. And maybe the Pakistanis are also thinking about Indians as the hegemon around. But you need also to be objective to the facts and figures, the realities. Go into it and see it. That is where integrity is important. You be true to your objectives. And that is the reason why I always say, please choose your objectives objectively. Don't make teleological questions. Don't put teleological objectives. What are teleological objectives? That you've already presumed, and you're trying to drag your research in a way that you will actually end up saying what you want to say. No. A hypothesis can be negated. You may end up very well saying, oh, what I thought about in the beginning, what I started with, is not what I now realize. I have realized it over. That's what I say, Research is a lot. When you're talking a PhD research or a 5-year project, or you're doing a big project about 3 years or 2 years, you may completely change your perspective on where you started from. Your hypothesis may go upside down. Doesn't matter. But please be objective and be true. Maintain that integrity. And be open-minded. Don't just close and slam your, mind, your eye and senses to facts and figures and ideas which are making you uncomfortable and not actually substantiating that you want to substantiate. Okay? Don't think it that way. You have to be true to very sensitive issues. You have to deal with sensitive issues like, say, some people are working on refugees. Okay? Some people are going to work on, say, ethnic issues or the issue of national security. So if you're talking about refugees, you should be true to their cause, but at the same time, you should also be ready to see how the state operates and what are the issues that the state encounters in real life. Do not get bogged by the fact that, either the refugees are imperiled or the state is imperiled. Please be neutral to facts and figures. And people who come to work on refugees, to me, I have candidly questioned that, are you ready to be a neutral observer to both sides or not? If you're all for refugees, fantastic, but don't maul the state. If you're all for state, okay, that's the way you want to be, but don't, completely say that refugees should be slammed on the face the moment they come at the border. So I'm making them things, I'm just saying it in a very general sense to just put things in perspective. So the first, I think, 5 things comes as a package. Then comes respect for intellectual property, copyrights. As I said, please acknowledge, please accept that it is somebody else's idea and you're just using it to put a point across. Put in citations. Put in the right facts and figures drawn from the right sources. If some data cannot be put in the public domain to which you are privy, and there is a condition that you cannot put it, especially when you're dealing with primary data, if somebody is giving you facts and figures and the person wouldn't like to be quoted, the person doesn't want to be mentioned in the source, you must not do so. You cannot do so. The privacy of the subjects, privacy of classified documents. You cannot produce classified documents in the public domain. They're classified. But you happen to have come across very, very sensitive information, very critical information that should not be put out in the public domain, whether in the research or in an article or in a small piece of commentary. Responsible publication, please. You have to be very careful in the way you're writing stuff. Don't, we have heard in our younger days, and I think that proves, that seems true till date, that the pen is mightier than the sword. So whatever information that you are going to put out in the public domain must be very, very carefully dished out as to what you are dishing out and what impact it will have on society. And that is what I said, there is a whole lot of social accounting to be done. People are going to be impacted, certain groups may be impacted, certain classes, certain communities may be impacted. So whatever you dish, you have to be very, very careful. Sensitive information and confidentiality of your sources have to be protected. Responsible mentoring and monitoring is what we should be doing. So I'm trying to put in the both sides of the coin here very candidly. Those who are going to mentor, those who are going to lead, those who are going to guide, supervise, show the way, they also need to do certain things responsibly. Make sure the student or the scholar or the partner or the project associate is doing things responsibly. See, the fact is, very candidly, it differs from person to person, it differs from colleague to colleague, it differs from, you know, expert to expert as to how he, she, or they are actually going to guide. Some people actually look through every line, fact, figure, comma, punctuation, and has an eye for it. Unfortunately, I'm one of them. But some people just trust the person they're working with or the person working with him. But at the end of the day, the responsibility does lie on the person who is, doing the thing. So responsible mentoring and respect for colleagues are also important. You're working in a group. This is a group project. Maybe be difference in opinion. Very well. Plurality of opinions are welcome. You don't dump opinions. You don't dump perspective by saying, oh, no, this is the main one. And I am the more academically sound person, or I am the more visible person. So therefore my words are good. Junior colleagues can, wait for their turn. I already mentioned about social responsibility, so I don't think I'm going to go again and again on that. Talk about non-discrimination, extremely important. You should not, you cannot, and you must not discriminate under any terms and conditions. Yes, you can discriminate. What kind of information which will be harmful, what kind of writing which will be harmful, that you can discriminate. Anything that is harmful for the outside world, people, hurt people's sentiment, flout privacy, you can discriminate. You can discriminate and say, no, this cannot be done, this cannot go out, this kind of work should not go out in the public domain. It will have negative impact. That is okay. But otherwise, you do not discriminate between co-workers, you do not discriminate between co-researchers, you do not discriminate between class, gender, society, etc., etc. And then comes that word which I have been poked at. And I'm poking you. The competence to do certain things. Very frankly, let me put it in a very jocular manner. If anybody comes and tells me that I want to work on, say, public administration and fantastic things relating to public administration, no matter how fantabulous it sounds, I think I am not competent for that. There is your honesty. Okay? Maybe you know the person, somebody who wants to work says, ma'am or sir, believe you me, I will handle the rest of the, you just be around. But I am going to be a part of that project. I'm going to be part of that, research enterprise. I must be sure that I am the person who is fit for that. That is the reason why I said, please. It sounds a very, very high, stupid philosophical question. But please ask yourselves whether you're the right person to do that job. Okay? So the competence part is a larger moral question that you all need to introspect and, take care of. Legality of things, as I said, for instance, you cannot bring out the identity of people who are sensitive. Say you're working on HIV people, you do not bring out the identity in the world open. You cannot do it. Or say people who are, very important to national security. You don't bang disclose their identity and say, oh, I met that person and this person said that. Right? You don't say that. Okay. So there are things that you have to take. Animal care, as I said, and human subjects protection, as I said. The confidentiality, sensitivity. Somebody doesn't want to be quoted. You generally ask, and this is true for science also. In the case of human beings, for social researchers like us, we must be very, very sensitive, respectful about the sentiments of our subjects also. You know? I have encountered issues where the scholar has come and told me, ma'am, the person is just not saying anything relevant to my work. What will I do? I said, doesn't matter. Just listen to the person, even if he's talking gibberish beyond your scope, not relevant to you at all. But you can infer from that what that person has undergone to maybe exaggerate things, to maybe, make theatrical narratives. That is also a kind of a lesson that you're going to draw. And if the person is not going to be quoted, doesn't matter. Don't quote. The fact that certain amount of people are not cooperating in your research is itself an observation. That is part of human subjects protection. You're protecting the identity, yet you are also trying to understand why those people do not want to be in the public domain, do not want to be taught. I have had a very nice small experience of people, of Indians who were forced to leave Myanmar, and I sent girls and boys to interact with them. Many of them wouldn't even like to talk about that part of the history. They wouldn't like to talk about because there's so much of pain. But some people were like open, they were like overflowing with emotion. They were exaggerating. One could make out. But then they were saying, oh, please don't mention my name, my family will not be very happy, me being said, and I don't want to be mentioned. Let it be like this. All right, fine. So you have to be also very patient with them. So these are some of the places that I think when you're working, please keep at the back of your mind. As I said, ethics is a very big, large, vast thing. What is ethical? What is non-ethical? Something we can keep on debating that may evolve over a period of time. But overall, as a social scientist or a social science researcher who would be interested in carrying on research at various levels, please keep in mind these are some of the things that you should keep in mind, that should be mapped in your mind, imprinted in your mind when you take future research. So I will close here and thank you for your attention. And over to you people right now. So I believe there are no questions as such, which is a fantastic thing. I'm sorry, I just had to speak in English. I'm not sure whether I was required to speak in Bengali at all or not. I thought that the mandate is to speak in English, and so therefore I did it in English only. আমার কি বাংলায় বলার কোনো প্রয়োজন ছিল? আমি আমি জানি না সেটা।
No, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Then it is done. So there are no questions, I believe. No need to. So if the organizers would like to close the session, I thank you all for being patient with me. And these are just of something of my own observations and ideas. And I hope that we will all emerge as good researchers in the future. We'll be able to
Thank you, ma'am.
together. Right. So I think I will now exit the meeting, if that's allowed.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I have to rush to the doctor. I have some medical appointments. So good night, everybody, and all the best for your future academic activities. And thank you for having me over. Good night. Stay safe.
Thank you, ma'am.